There's a great crowd here. We appreciate you coming out. As you know, this is National Homeless Awareness Month, and we're so happy to be having this discussion here with you all tonight and during this month. My first question to the panel is homelessness actually a problem? And if it is a problem, who is it a problem for? And, why don't we start with you, Officer Hove?
From the police department's point of view, if the general public calls in and complain about an issue, we are mandated, obligated to go deal with that issue. If that issue is throughout the day issues that relates to people that are homeless, and I so hate that word because it has such a gamut. It goes from one side to the other side and everything in between, and then some left and right and some up and down. So it really is hard to just say, is homelessness an issue? Of course it's an issue. If anybody's without a home, it's not a good thing to be. What we have to address as a police department, when you narrow it down to our function, is if the general public calls and says, we have a problem here because somebody's bothering me, somebody's behavior right now is inappropriate, is potentially illegal, would you come and take a look at it? We go look at that and we make the appropriate decision based on the rules and books and laws and so forth that we have access to, to, as I said earlier, modify that behavior, hopefully through voluntary compliance. If I can get you to change your behavior, you don't need to go in timeout. If you can't change your behavior because your lifestyle is too complicated to do that, then we have a more complex problem. Sending you down the street has satisfied the person who called me, but has not satisfied the need for that person to get the help he or she needs. But he will be somewhere else, and we have bought time. Once that person down the street no longer enjoys or appreciates or puts up with that behavior that was earlier up the street, they will then call us and we go do the shuffle game one more time. During that shuffle game, we interact with these individuals, and just like all of you are different in your personalities, so are all the officers, and so are all the people that we come into contact with. Therefore, the individual contact is going to be, again, a gamut from, this was a pleasant conversation, to they're harassing me at 3 o'clock in the morning, waking me up, asking me to leave the place I'm sleeping in. Where else am I going to sleep? Officer doesn't know. Officer's been told to go move you from the property of somebody else at 3 in the morning. He can't move you from the piece of property at 4 in the afternoon because that's not when you're sleeping there. So the fact is 3 in the morning sounds brutal, but that's the 3 in the morning is when we get called to go deal with that issue. So the homelessness, and I will predominantly tonight speak from my tribe of people that I interact with, and my tribe of people or my customers or whatever you want to call them are good people that got lost in the system, and they are not criminally minded. They are just not able to handle their own affairs. Therefore, they end up doing nuisance crimes because they exist in a public view where the rest of you would disappear into your houses and do your thing in there. You can have a beer in there, but if you're at Salvation Army and that's a program that's a sober environment, if you have a beer, you get kicked out for 30 days. That's the necessity in that program. Those are the rules. That's how they set it up, and that's a good thing. But if you were told you can never drink again, most of you at some point or another want to do one of those things you're not allowed to do. So it's very difficult to be homeless because you're on public display. So it's the behavior that comes across from being in public that's an issue when it becomes criminal, not the fact that you don't have a house. There are lots of people that are homeless that we don't know about from the police department.
It's an issue for us as a community and for those that are in need. I really think it's a moral issue, and aside just from the financial issues, it's a moral issue for us as members of our community that we're not caring for other members of our community that need the help. I think it's imperative that we help, there's a proper shelter for people to lay their heads and their belongings at night, and if not, then those people they're going to continue to spiral and have issues, and I think having housing is not a privilege from my perspective and from many of the people I work with. It's an actual right, and it's a basic human need, and we need to promote that more locally and nationally, that it's a basic human need. We should provide housing for everyone in one form or another: permanent supportive housing, transitionary housing. The shelter system isn't an answer, but it's needed until we can provide permanent housing for everyone. I don't know how many of you saw the KEYT News segment on the safe parking the other night of the lady with her 2 daughters that are in the safe parking program. Christine from New Beginnings is here. That's just one other example that just moves me, that all of you should see it. It's safe parking is another. We shouldn't have a safe parking program. We should have housing programs, but unfortunately we don't. So we have to have safe parking in our community, and it's great that it's there. But it tears at my heart when you see the daughter having to study out in the middle of the street under a street light at night in order to keep up her good grades. And we're not doing things right as a community as long as stuff like that exists, and we need to do better. I think we're not going to build our way out of it in Santa Barbara alone, but there's opportunities regionally to work together for other housing opportunities. We're looking at master leasing concepts for master leasing homes that exist. We're looking at adaptive reuses of other buildings and facilities. We're trying to look at being very creative in providing the housing that's needed. But when you look at the need, when you do the counts, how are you going to provide for 6,000 more units to get people? You're right. It's tough to come up with the answers for that, but if we can all work together as a community, we can at least chip away at it and do a job. But that whole supply and demand issue, that's what drives the cost too of housing, right? Santa Barbara, the vacancy rate's less than 1% in the city proper, so that's going to drive the prices up. Even just looking at the fair market rents, I wrote down some numbers here. The fair market rent for a 2-bedroom, something that the lady on the safe parking program that would need for her and her daughters, fair market rent is $1,654. That's even a low number. In order to afford that rent of $1,654 a month, and pay an affordable portion of your income of 30%, you'd have to earn $66,000 a year in order to afford that 2-bedroom. And most of the people in need that we're coming across, they're nowhere near that. It would have to be a housing wage of $31.81 an hour in order to afford that apartment. Or if you're working at minimum wage, you'd have to work 159 hours a week. Not possible.
Yeah, I mean, you have 7,000 people on your waiting list, and if I'm not mistaken, you're not taking applications right now.
No, we are taking applications on the Section 8 program. We have closed the public housing waiting list.
And homeless numbers dipped very slightly nationally this past year. However, what has increased is the number of people who are living right on the edge. The severe housing burden in California is almost at 800,000 individuals, meaning their rents are actually not sustainable. And there's a possibility that if things don't improve dramatically economically, we're going to be facing more people who are out of their homes and out of their houses. And the question remains whether we're prepared to whether we're dealing with the issues we have right now, and whether we're prepared to deal with perhaps even more strains on the resources. And Sheila, I don't want to use you as the go-to public policy person, but in your experience, what have you seen in the past that might work that we're not looking at now? And what have you seen from a public policy issue that we might want to think about? One of the questions I want to get to is, I believe the city spends $800,000 out of its budget on homeless services, out of I think a $200 million budget, something like that.
Yeah, it was about
260 million. Yeah, about a $260 million budget. The city spends, I believe, $800,000 on homeless services. The county has, I believe it has a $1.2 billion budget and spends about $8.4 million. So there's a basic question is, are we spending enough of our public resources on the issue? Wait, I put you on the spot there?
No, nothing like that. Well, as I said, I think the city of Santa Barbara has a remarkable record. 15% of all the housing in the city of Santa Barbara is permanently affordable to low and very low income people. It's probably the highest percentage of any city in the state. And it's been because we did have a redevelopment agency, but that's gone, which the city used. Before the state legislature passed a law saying that a certain, I think it was 50% had to be spent on building affordable housing. The city of Santa Barbara was doing that anyway because the city recognized the need, but that is gone. There are the mentally ill, and we don't have mental institutions anymore. Is society willing to build more? There are some people that simply do need to be in some kind of protective institutional setting, but it will take a lot of money. And it's up to society. Are they willing? Are they willing to pay more taxes? You know what the answer to that is. Well, it doesn't seem to happen very often when it's on the ballot. It is a very difficult problem, and I don't see what the answer is. There are, with the loss of the redevelopment money, the loss of, I gather there's been some loss of tax credit programs as well. That makes it even more difficult. Those, private sector work together with the housing authority to create new projects. There are redevelopment projects that, some of the better looking projects in town are housing authority projects. They look a lot better than the privately owned ones. The housing authority has done a fantastic job.
Sure, that's, in the past we had the redevelopment agency. The housing authority had the benefit of having that redevelopment agency to have those housing set-aside dollars that had to be spent on affordable housing. So they were a land banker of sorts for the housing authority, for us to be able to take advantage of opportunities to go out and buy a piece of land and plan for the development. If we had the redevelopment agency dollars to be able to buy the land, we could make up the rest of the equation through tax credits and bond financing to keep to build an affordable development. But now that that's gone, that's really put a hamper on not only the housing authority but people self-help housing and other nonprofit developers that took advantage of that housing set-aside dollar. So that's one thing we need to look at, is creating a replacement permanent source of affordable housing dollars that replaces that 20% set aside that went away that we need. And there's ways to do, there's legislation working its way through the state that a lot of us can support and advocate for. There's a piece of legislation that takes a portion of the real estate sales transfer tax, not on single-family real estate homes, but on businesses, and that would just about make up the gap annually of what that housing set-aside dollar used to make for us. So that would provide a new permanent source of funding for affordable housing that would really help us couple that with tax credits and other funding sources. So there's that. There's something else radical that I think is really important for us to support, and that's tax reform in the terms of mortgage interest deduction. I think we can reform that and have a cap on mortgage interest deduction up to a certain amount, and right now that foregone revenue could be captured and put towards affordable housing, both for your local housing authorities and for nonprofit developers to build more affordable housing.
Man.
Yes, of course.
This actually dovetails with the previous question. Is there a problem? And part of the problem is lost productivity. And if you have people who are bright and sane and sober enough to be productive, either as volunteers in some way or as workers, they're going to contribute to the community. So the problem is the lost productivity. I mean, I have a reputation of being a pretty bright guy. Why do I have to spend my time chasing down people stealing my backpack and my sleep? I got crashed at my friend's house because I don't want to get in a fight tonight. Come on, what a waste of resources. My father's a professor of medicine. I should be working on the pneumonia and the flu and the tuberculosis issues about which I feel so passionately about, but I have to get my own life together. And that's a waste. It's an absolute waste of a degree professional. And there's a lot of other bright homeless people. All right, so there's a lost productivity. So this question that we're on now kind of has this welfare state model, and that's okay. I think that, yes, it's valid to say, 800,000 is not much out of 260 million. However, it's not simply that homeless people are beggars or welfare people. To the contrary, it's not just a matter of taxing the working people to carry the lumpen proletariat parasitic dross. It is actually a matter of helping people to be returned to productivity. And on that, I would like to point out that, there was the corporate bailout for Goldman Sachs and billions of dollars to bail out the wealthy people. And yet when a person in a family gets wiped out and they're having to live in their car, all of a sudden all of these very tight-fisted libertarian economic models start getting batted around. So I think that as far as enough resources, yeah, they should probably spend more. However, let people build geodesic domes. Let people build yurts. Let people build a little density, because right now, it's almost treasonous the way we're forcing our own citizens into renegade status. So please don't think homeless people are just out there trying to get money. To the contrary, people want to be productive.
There's a community in Ventura called Riverhaven, and it's a dome city of sorts that's governed kind of by one manager, and it's an alternative to finding some defunct housing, some buildings that you could redevelop. These are kind of what Geof was saying, just an alternative way that that people can kind of start from scratch and don't have to worry about the things that can completely distract and attribute to your lost productivity. When you're dealing with trying to be safe out in the open. So on that measure, I'm curious to learn more, Kristen, about the 100K Homes initiative, and if the answer is to get a roof over people's heads first and foremost.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not okay that our community lets people die on the streets. That's not okay, and that's happening, and it happens fairly often. More than 30 people last year. That's not okay. So 100K Homes is really about trying to learn who's in our community and who's living on the streets or experiencing homelessness, and then really trying to figure out how we can best meet their needs. And what we aren't doing very well, I don't think, is we're not triaging. So we need to figure out who needs the intensive support services that permanent supportive housing provides, and who just needs maybe affordable housing, or they need help finding a job because they lost their job and became homeless. But really figuring that out, how do we target our resources best? Because the people that are experiencing chronic homelessness that Officer Hove works with all the time are the most vulnerable, the most complex situations on the streets, and we're expecting them to get better when they don't know where they're going to sleep at night and they're not safe. So that's sort of what 100K is about, getting to know who's in our community and then figuring out how to best target our resources, because people who are experiencing chronic homelessness, they're 12 to 16% of the homeless community, but they consume 75% of the public dollars because they're cycling in and out of the ERs, the jails. Officer Hove gets called out, all that stuff is our taxpayer money anyway. So yeah, I want to help people. And, it just makes sense for our community to be wiser about what we're doing.
One of the things I think is important is I want to answer your question about whether this is acceptable, and it's not acceptable. And I certainly think a lot of the comments we heard from the officer this evening and from others on the panel, I absolutely agree with. We as a community have an obligation to address these issues. But I think the issues are a little broader than this when we're talking about housing in this community. We have a group of people, all of whom are individuals that have different reasons why they're in the situation that they're in, who do not have safe permanent housing. And we as a community need to help find ways to address that. We have a lot of people who have, say, permanent housing, but it's not in this community. I found it interesting that you really wanted to highlight where I live to the group this evening. You know, I moved here 4 months ago with my family from a home that we've owned for 10 years. It was a beautiful home on a half-acre lot right on the Canadian border. But in order to purchase a house that was half that size here in Santa Barbara, it was going to cost me 5 times as much money. And that just wasn't going to happen. And that's why I'm commuting, along with 15,000 other people every day. And that's sort of a low-end estimate of that number. And it will continue to grow as we see businesses expanding in Gallia, where we do have a lot of land that's available for tech companies to grow there. We have a lot of folks who are running businesses in Gallia who tell us that they are having a hard time recruiting people into the community because their choice is to either spend more than they're comfortable with on housing here or to commute from a distance that they don't find acceptable, and so they're simply not coming for those jobs. So I certainly don't want to suggest that we should put as much or even more emphasis on housing for people who can afford it, just not in the community, as to those who can't. But I just want to make sure that we understand the breadth of the problem. We live in a community that has amongst the highest housing costs in this country. And so the issues that we face here are going to be much more difficult than I think you would find in most other parts of the country when we're dealing with homeless issues. I think more specifically for me, though, on the issue that I think you asked me to come and talk about this evening, which is sort of what I'm hearing from the business community on aggressive panhandling issues, is that I do think that there is an acceptable standard, an acceptable norm that we should all have for how we comport ourselves in public. And I think the police department does a very good job with the resources that we provide them in trying to address that. But I think we heard throughout this city council campaign, there were several candidates who talked about finding alternative ways to get more people on the street, more visibility of either uniformed officers, or I think as Bendy likes to call them, yellow and blue shirts out, to make sure that we have people who are interacting with those who may be doing things that are just not up to those acceptable standards. Is there a role for the business community to play? Absolutely. And when I hear members tell me, well, it's the city's responsibility to address this, no, it isn't. It's all of our responsibilities to address it. We all have a role to play. But we need to understand not only what that role is, but I think as a community, we need to continue down this path of ensuring that we have the right people on the street, that we interact with those who we think are causing those problems, and we try and find ways to dissuade them from doing that so that everyone feels safe in these areas. I think what I hear from some people when it comes to this specific issue of aggressive panhandling is that there's been areas of the community where this has been addressed very successfully, and again, I would point out that Milpas, I think, has done a great job of addressing this. Not that I'm trying to share it on, but I think she's done a great job there. But I think one of the ways that was addressed there was to really acknowledge the fact that this is not something where we say, police department, come solve our problem. It's a community effort. Everyone has to be involved. The business owners, the people who live in the community, the police department does have a role. The shelters in those areas have a role. Whatever it is that we need, we bring the right people in and we help address it as a community. We don't simply pawn it off on one group and say it's your responsibility, because it's not. And so I think for those who look at what I keep hearing about on Cabrillo and State as an issue for the city to solve, that's where I don't think we're taking it seriously. I think it's something that we all have to step up as a community, find solutions for. And we need to acknowledge the fact that there's a problem. And I'm sorry if some people disagree with me, but I've been here for 4 months. I've spoken to 130 business owners in this community, and I will tell you that the vast majority, 90% of those, have listed this issue as one of the top issues that they're facing.
During one of the council elections, one of the candidates talked about homeless, freedom and rights and responsibilities. I think it was Audrey. And I was very struck by that. And actually, groups like Milpas Action Task Force emphasize responsibility. And groups like, Sandbridge and so forth maybe emphasize, or maybe that's not a good example, but the Freedom Warming Center certainly emphasizes freedom. You don't have to do anything to get in the warming center. You don't have to get a flu shot. You don't have to cover your mouth and cough and so forth. So, yes, the balance between freedom and responsibility is a venerable philosophical question. But I am going to give you a very novel answer, because I'm going to turn the tables and say that this discussion of freedom or responsibility, is all centered on this poor guy who's 60 years old, who's been sleeping on cold concrete for the past 6 months and can barely keep his sanity and is near death. And there are many people like that. And why are we so concerned with responsible behavior on their part when a lot of us would just go nuts if we had to endure that? I would like to say, let's talk about freedom and responsibility on the message boards and the blogs, because when I go into Ed Hat and I go into Newshawk and I read somebody who's lived in this community for 40 years who refers to homeless people as an infestation, I'm revolted, and I'm reminded of Der Stürmer under Weimar Germany, and I'm reminded of the freedom exercised by the radio broadcasters in Rwanda during the Rwanda Holocaust. And that's what we see every week, every month. There's anonymous bloggers not having the responsibility, and they're dehumanizing homeless people. I want to see some responsibility on the part of the editorial boards of all of the media. Okay. Also, I want to see the discussion of freedom and responsibility, not on the hapless homeless person, but on the level of the administrative level of the executive directors and the boards of directors of the homeless services agencies, who all assume that their staff never violate the rights of the clientele. And frequently, I know when I was a homeless advocate, people came to me when they felt abused and that their human rights or civil rights were being violated by the homeless service providers. So I need to see more responsibility for the staff conduct and behavior. I hope you're not seeing this, taking this as sidestepping. The final point in my notes, I want to see freedom, ironically, for capital. Even though I really basically have a lot of Marxist background and bring a lot of Marxist perspectives, I'm actually not a communist or a socialist per se. I want to see the bourgeois revolution continue. I want to see the capital. I want to see the guy who's got a pickup truck and some hammer and nails be able to get work. So I want to see freedom for capital to get out there and produce, and I want to see the freedom to rent your cottage in your backyard instead of these constant regulations. And a good example is Sunshine Acres up in San Luis Obispo, and it's got this crusty old redneck who's actually renting to formerly homeless individuals for like $300 a month. And you know, Democrats and liberals in government are jumping on this guy like he's Jesse James, but he's actually doing a good thing. So you know, maybe this is not quite a fair answer, but I would like to see freedom and responsibility, you know, focused on a little broader level.
Well, I think that we certainly do need a lot more money behind housing people appropriately. There isn't enough money to do, there hasn't been enough money to do our work properly, and not only on the building front, but just on the voucher front in providing rental subsidies. There's, you know, the Department of Housing and Urban Development budget makes up about 2% of the overall federal budget, and you know, we need to increase that, not decreasing. And right now, with sequestration and the federal budget issues, it's been on a decline, and we've had to pull back 110 vouchers from people being able to be reused when they're issued. And if something's not done, we're going to have to pull back another 110 vouchers in 2014. So I think we need to put a lot more money behind it, but we need to do it also smartly. We need to, as Kristen said, we need to really look at what do people need, and how can we most efficiently and effectively provide for those needs, and put the money behind in a real smart way to really have to effectuate good solutions.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I mean, part of the problem is we sometimes don't know how well we're doing at things, and that's where data really comes in, and C3H is really working hard to figure out what's going on in the community, how people are doing as far as, you know, are people exiting the shelters and returning to homelessness, or are they getting housed? And individual agencies are figuring that out for themselves, but we don't have a coordinated system yet to say this is what's going on in the community. So that's one of the big things that C3H is really working on with social venture partners. I saw a couple people here. To really figure out that data piece so that we are making smart decisions. We're using evidence-based practices. We are working on piloting a Housing First program, which is, again, specifically targeting people experiencing chronic homelessness, and it's focused on the Milpas area, since that's, you know, one of the hot zones, I guess you could say, for issues around homelessness. And the idea is, again, trying to figure out how to adapt our system to people who have very complex lives. And it takes a team, it takes a village to get people into housing. You know, we can't do it alone as housing providers. We rely a lot on service providers to help us out. and volunteers in the community. We're really fortunate in Santa Barbara to have a lot of volunteers who are wanting to help out. When we did our point in time count in January, we had 650 volunteers. That was the most out of anywhere in the country that's part of the 100K Homes campaign. I mean, that's incredible. And Common Ground Santa Barbara is sort of that volunteer network. They have outreach teams. So we always need more money, and we're learning how to be more smart in our decisions, and I think that that's really important, and I think it's really important that people keep asking us the hard questions and say, what's going on, what are you doing, how do you know you're doing well, because we need that. So
Sheila, why can't we just open up that budget a little bit more, make that little slice that goes to housing and homelessness a little bit more, bigger? Is it just a reflection of the public will?
I think so, and priorities, and a lot of the funding has come, it's federal funding that's provided these Section 8 vouchers, which use existing housing. People find a rental on their own, and then use the Section 8 voucher to pay down the rent to what they can afford. Not all landlords will take Section 8 vouchers, but a lot of them do, and we have a huge amount of it in Santa Barbara. But as Rob said, federal budget cuts are reducing that, and over the last 10 years, it's been going steadily down,
Yes.
hasn't it?
Yes, it has.
I mean, it's sort of like all the good things, in our national parks, the budget's been going down over the years, and until there's a will among the public to ante up for these things that they say they want. Remember very well when being in my office at City Hall, all this street repair equipment were out there redoing Anacapa Street, and I was getting complaints from people, you've got Anacapa Street closed, because hey, if you want it to be fixed, we have to have the money to do it, and we have to, you're going to have a little inconvenience.
You have to do it.
You have, in order to do it. And people want services, but they don't want to pay for it. And the public has to recognize that if you want to do something about this, it's going to take more money, as has been said. I do want to say that I agree with the things that you as well, and the restorative policing program, I think, has been excellent. And then, Ken, with what you've experienced, I've heard that too from the business people. Business people have a right to run their businesses without finding feces on the doorstep when they come, and without people being so offensive to customers that I've had people tell me they will not come downtown anymore. And, just all it takes is one encounter, and then there's someone who, is going, upper State Street or wherever, or, they're not shopping in Santa Barbara, or they're going online, what have you. It's a two-way street. You can't, I don't think we should, it seems to me we need to expect from the homeless, that we need to expect no worse behavior than we expect from anybody else. I mean, just because they're homeless, should they be allowed to harass people and be offensive?
Who is allowing it? Nobody's allowed. Nobody advocates allowing it.
I know, but
That's the myth that you guys keep putting out.
yes.
And it's harmful. Please stop.
Okay. What am I to tell the woman, the young mother, goes downtown with her two little kids, and they are screamed at and yelled at.
Get Officer Hove and his staff will look into it.
I think they have a right to go downtown in a peaceable way, and the kids are asking her, what does that mean? And she's not going to come downtown anymore. And this is her downtown just as much as it is anybody else's. So it's a two-way thing, and I think there has to be some. It's anarchy to let some people just do absolutely what they want, and with no regard for others. We live in a society with other people, and we all have to respect one another.
If I can just speak to that. I have two kids, married with two kids, and when my kids were much younger, my mother-in-law used to come up from Los Angeles, because it was her vacation town, to come to once a week to look after the kids for a couple of days, and she loved that, and we enjoyed it. she used to go to the library, and one day she came and she goes, I can't go there anymore. I can't go there anymore because it's so dangerous for me to go there because of the clientele that's sitting outside, the gauntlet that she had to go through in order to get in, to go get the little stories read to my little boys. And she stopped going. So I thought to myself, I'm a police officer here. Why is it that somebody I know this close, my own family, is now, in essence, denied access to a place that should be a place you can go to of serenity and exploration and so forth for children? And I looked at the group that was out, and I knew that not a single one of those people would harm anybody that I knew. But my mother-in-law didn't know that. So my mother-in-law had to go through that gauntlet, and she's not overly scared of life. She's just with 2 children that she's entrusted to protect at that moment, and she didn't feel comfortable. I'm 6 feet tall, can handle myself. I had no problem going through these people and say, hi, how are you to them? But my mother-in-law did, and many other people do as well. So we get the calls for service, and we do go as officers to go deal with that, because we have to go make that disappear so that there's a free passage for the people that are entitled to use this, the majority of the people that are entitled to use these places, not colonized by the minority that's sitting and doing unsavory behavior that causes people to call us, because indeed it is a violation of law. Now, where do we move him? We talked about it earlier. I moved him from there to there, and they didn't do anything. So I had to look at it as a police officer and go, what can I do to make that go to the root cause of this? How do I make this go away? Not just him go away, but his reason to be there go away. What does that take? And that brings me back to something that I wanted to mention about the Freedom Center. Long time ago, 5-6 years ago, I went to a call for service in the morning of the Mission. Mission is the most beautiful place with a beautiful lawn, and there was a man that had died during the night. So we go up to calls for service. I take a picture of him because you see the beautiful, beautiful Mission in the back, the lawn up there, the rose garden, and the whole thing. And I took a picture of this because the irony of it all. I go down to the bottom of State Street later, still thinking about this guy. There was a bottle of Jack Daniels next to him, half filled. He was laying on a bench. He had died. It was cold that night. What I see down 400, 500 State is somebody named Freedom. And Freedom is in a wheelchair. Freedom is an old man. He's drinking a lot. He's got the vodka bottle inside, and we tried and tried and tried. And I show Freedom this picture. And I say, Freedom, look at this guy. He's laughing. He goes, oh, look at that guy. He's got his bottle of Jack Daniels, half filled. And I'm showing him the picture, and then I say to Freedom, I said, he's dead. And Freedom starts crying. He goes, oh my God, I can't believe that. This is horrible. This is terrible. And says, Freedom, I don't want you to die. I don't want you to go the same way. We worked for 3 months to try and get you indoors. Myself, probably 10 other people trying to get Freedom rounded up into seeing some kind of light that made him understand that his lifestyle, it wasn't just us wanting something better for him. He was going to die out there. He was feeble, sitting in a wheelchair, and it was getting cold. He wouldn't listen to it. By George, by Jolly, by God, or whatever he used to say to me, and he goes, I'm going to do fine. I got a quarter right here. I can go get a cup of coffee. I'm fine. 2 days later, he was dead. And now they have the Freedom Warming Center named after Freedom. So Freedom didn't want to go in. So it isn't enough that if we have 6,000 homeless people, we can't build 6,000 cubicles to put 6,000 people into when half of those people require 6 or 7 service providers around them, individual providers, to get them talked into going into that cubicle or whatever that domain is. So what we have to really focus on is, I see lots of service providers in here, and I know how hard you work. I know how hard you work, Kristen. I've worked with you. She and I are working on a person now that can suck the energy out of 5 people. Last week she sucked the energy out of 3 people, and we left thinking, and that was in Ventura, and it's somebody who used to be here. I've worked on her for 5 years, 3 years, known her for 12. She sucks the energy out, but we keep doing it. And then 2 days later, she called and says, yeah, I'm drinking. I was lying to her, I'm drinking. Now we have 4 people on her. It takes a village for 1 person. If you have 6,000 people, that means you need 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 people times 6,000 to convince that population to make the right choice or the wrong choice at that moment. And no matter how deep you fall, there's always a right choice and a wrong choice. And if you choose the right choice, you step up a little bit, but there's pain that goes with that. And what we run into as service providers to try and get these people into housing is the pain is not worth leaving where you are to go into that housing. And I see that repeatedly and repeatedly. When you take somebody who's scarred by living chronic homelessly, it hurts you. It kills something inside your soul. And that doesn't come back easy. You need cognitive therapy, you need help, you don't just need a pad to go into. So when we then get them into that pad, we can't just turn our back and walk away from it. So this isn't just a matter of how many housing units do we have. It's a matter of how are you going to address these individuals and give them that service that they need and stay with that case management, the wraparound case management, so you can keep them in housing. And that's what we need. So if somebody... So if somebody will give... Quality of care, and continued and sustained. So if somebody can give me a motel with 6 rooms, I can take 6 of you most chronic homeless people and put them in there, and with our team, sustain them staying there. But if there's a set of rules that say the first time you drink or come home, and this I'm not making up, if you come home with an octopus on top of your head, and you sit down and you eat it raw, then you will be kicked out. That's what happened to one of my individuals. Now, who wants to live with somebody who does that? Apparently not the house that he was living in. Now he's homeless again. I happen to love him. He's a great guy. He didn't mean any harm, and all he did was eat a live octopus. But he didn't hurt anybody. But he certainly, except the octopus. Except the octopus. I asked him, why did you do that? He goes, what's wrong with it? I didn't have the answer. What was wrong with it was what he did was abnormal behavior. But it wasn't criminal, it wasn't malicious, it was just abnormal, and he wasn't allowed to sustain his living conditions in that place we placed him in. So we had to bring him somewhere else. It is very hard to place him in housing and keep him in housing. So I sent him to mental health, and they said, he scares us. He came into a session dripping wet because he had jumped in the ocean while he was wearing a suit. And I said, what's wrong with that? We don't do that. Now, that wasn't what I asked. I said, what's wrong with it? Well, it's just not what we do. Well, he's not of sound mind. He's mentally ill. Well, we can't service him here. You need to take him somewhere else. Where am I going to take him? Where is he going to live? So we need the service providers to help get into that place, sustain it, and that's what the Housing First model is. Get them in, get them secure, and then really start working and staying with them. And don't do the punitive stuff of saying, you did wrong, you out. Do the, you messed up today, how are we going to do it differently tomorrow? So.
You know, I do want to say that working with Common Ground, we are hearing a lot of one end of the spectrum. There are some great people that we're working with out there that have the other end of the spectrum stories, people who are homeless for the other reasons, families, children. We're doing some great work out there, and so I'm sorry about your 4 complaints that you've had in 4 months, but there's some great things going on out there in our community as well. And you're welcome to join us out there anytime. I'd love for you to know more of that aspect of our community as you work with the Chamber of Commerce. But right now, Rob, I'd love to know if you could tell us a little bit more about the master leasing concept and the adaptive reuse of buildings, because we do have some vacant buildings here in Santa Barbara that have been vacant for quite some time.
Sure, well, sometimes I drive up Upper State Street and I see a boarded up, fenced off motel that's waiting to be developed, right? That probably will take years to be developed. Why not master lease that, make it habitable, and you know, you can get a organization, a nonprofit organization to master lease it, and if you get the funding, and if some of the folks that we're able to house in a location like that, they can pay a portion of their income that's affordable to them towards an affordable rent at the place, and you have other grant funding, you could sustain that for a time to get people out of the weather and get them housed in a place like that. Or single-family homes like Kristen talked about briefly, that we may be able to master lease some single-family homes that are for rent, and get some shared housing out of those single-family homes.
We seem to talk a lot, we seem to be stopgapped by money issues, by all kinds of different issues. I mean, I went to a meeting one time where they were discussing about how the homeless were the cause of the bacteria in the ocean. And I had to go to that meeting, and when the subject came up, I raised my hand and I said, please, people, can anybody tell me what the output of a blue whale is in the ocean on a daily basis? And that stopped the talk about homeless people putting bacteria in the ocean. Well, anyway, I'm just saying that homelessness in most issues, and I'm not talking about chronic homelessness, I'm talking about most homelessness, is a temporary situation for most people. And people do like to adapt up. And I wish we had step-by-step things that would help people adapt up to where they can stabilize out and then they can move on with their lives. Because everybody knows how to move on with their lives once they are stable. So if we can come up with some kinds of ideas, and I'm talking about motor housing parks, and Geof was talking about geodesic domes, I'm talking about stabilization, and that's the key word, because you have to stabilize people in order for them to grow. They have to plant roots. And as long as you're moving them from one space to another, pushing RVs this way to that way, and putting up signs saying they can't be here and they can't be there, okay, put them off the streets. Build some place for them to be, you know. So I'm just saying, over the 30 years that I've been an activist, I've been trying to get people to see these kind of situations, black and white situations, and nobody can see them because money issues get in the way, or this gets in the way. We all have the ability to do things without costing billions of dollars to do it. We don't have to have that kind of money.
I wanted to talk about the money issues because that is a part of the solution and it's a part of the problem. And one thing we haven't mentioned here tonight is the percentage of our county budget that goes to public safety. We're talking about a lot of money that goes to the jail, that goes to the law enforcement, that goes to probation, that goes to the courts, as opposed to the money that goes for treatment. And in the last 12 years, the percentage of our county budget that goes for anything related to housing and treatment has gone from 51%, took me a while to find this here, 51% to 14%, okay? And in that same period of time, in the last 12 years, the amount of money, percentage of our county budget that we've been spending on public safety has gone from 28% to 60%. But we believe, the people that I work with, believe that public safety needs to be redefined and it needs to include treatment. We're talking about mental illness, among other things. We're talking about chronic addiction to alcohol and substances. And to help someone, like Keld said, to help someone who's got a serious mental health problem or a serious drug and alcohol problem, it's going to be labor intensive. You're going to have to start earlier in the process. Where was freedom? Who was helping freedom when he was 20 years old, when he started drinking? It is going to cost money. And why are we spending our money on a new jail, for example? Why are we spending our money on hordes of probation officers? The incarceration rate in this country went drastically up over the last 30 years for several reasons. One of them is the drug laws. We're putting people behind bars, but ultimately that is not solving the problem. So let's look at reallocating our revenues rather than taxing necessarily.
Kristen said that about 15% of the homeless community is using about 75% of the dollars that are set aside for homeless services. And I'm wondering, what does that 75% consist of? Is it for housing, or what is it?
All right, our microphone is down, so we have to speak up.
Because people who are experiencing chronic homelessness like that are the people that Officer Hove is getting called out to see repeatedly. They're going into the ERs because they're very sick people. They have a lot of physical illnesses. They're having strokes on the streets and still living in their vehicles. Really complex issues, and they're in a really uninhabitable environment. And so, you know, they're getting arrested for things that we wouldn't because we're inside and nobody's seeing us do the things that we're doing. But because they're on the sidewalk doing them, they are getting tickets, they're getting arrested, and all of that stuff is public dollars, and that's very expensive for them to be cycling in and out of the jails. To the ER, the hospital, Cottage Hospital is, you know, involved in our efforts now because, you know, they realize what a big issue it is. So that's, yeah, I mean, that's what I meant. And supportive housing is expensive, but it's pretty much equal or less expensive than having somebody live on the streets when they have that complex of a life.
If I could just ask a follow-up. given
She's
that.
not going to tell you what she's doing inside.
No. Is it your experience that there is a political and public policy consensus, or even on this group, that we really ought to focus on that 12 and 15%, either in a greater way or in a more focused way, in a more laser-like way?
Please, speak up, anyone.
Rob or
It-
myself,
it's-
I think are thinking the same thing.
It's becoming more clear to, I think, across the nation and even among us in the community that is where the focus needs to be. And that again is both in terms of saving the public dollars in terms of the cost, and also the moral issue is those people that are that the chronic, very chronic homeless are your most vulnerable at risk of dying. And if we can change that, if we can get them housed appropriately with the appropriate services.
And
May I clarify?
Yeah.
A distinction that I think is overlooked is there's a distinction between saying that this large percentage of homeless designated funds are going to this small cohort. That's one thing. But it's another thing to say that this cohort is costing all this money, and that includes ER. That's not part, ER is not part of homeless but allocations. That includes public safety, is not necessarily generally part of.
Right.
So, prisons are very, very expensive, as Suzanne Reardon very courageously reminds us. The war on drugs is costing huge amounts of money. So this statistic can be very misleading and lead us down the wrong path if this statistic is not handled carefully and examined, and where is the statistic coming from and what does it really mean, because that statistic could also be used for very nefarious purposes to somehow demonize the most vulnerable people who we should have helped long ago when they were being beaten by their parents or what have you. So a caveat, let's not get too carried away with that particular statistic, and let's be clear what we're saying.
There's, if you haven't seen it, I think most may have, there's an article that's called The $1 Million Murray, and it talks about the cost associated with taking a person that lives in that, what appears to be squalor, but the real associated cost in terms of support and so forth that goes into that. I've seen several of my clients be multi-million-dollar Murrays. And for $600 a month, we can put them at the following hotel. So if it costs $160 to book you into county jail, and you do that twice, 3 times a week, then why not have them in an apartment somewhere that costs $600-700?
Yeah, there you go.
Why not have? But they have to be able to sustain themselves in that apartment. That's what I talked about earlier, and I'm not going to go into that again. But it's very expensive to have that lifestyle unchecked and continue with the ER rooms and all that stuff and all. So I wish we could take some of that energy and put it into those individuals and bring them up to where they need to be, because they are very expensive. And if you haven't seen the article, please read it. Just Google it, $1 Million Murray, and you'll see the silliness of throwing all that money in on the back end, and it gets nowhere. You're just dumping tons and tons of money on a problem that's not intelligently and logistically addressed. So take a look at that and that'll help you get perspective.
My name's Jill Wallerstedt, and I run the homeless program at the Santa Barbara Rescue Mission. And I just wanted to say that the people we've been mostly talking about, the people that Keld deals with, the people on Milpas, they are from a very small percentage of homeless people, and they cause a majority of the problems. And I just want to put my voice out there for the 80% of the people who could be housed tomorrow without supported services, and I work with them. So I just want to say that the shortage affects people who are not burning through your resources, but they're living at the Santa Barbara Rescue Mission because they have nowhere else to go. So.
Yay.
Yeah.